Hey everybody, Pastor Scott here from Shelter Cove. You know, we live in some fearful times. It reminds me of recently when somebody asked me, what does it mean to fear the Lord? They'd seen that phrase in Scripture many times, and they kind of struggled with it. They didn't really understand it. It didn't make any sense. Why should we fear someone who loves us? Have you ever used a word maybe frequently, and then one day you find out it doesn't mean what you thought it means? Have you ever seen that movie, The Princess Bride? In that movie, if you recall, the beautiful damsel Buttercup is kidnapped by the villainous, self-proclaimed genius Vizzini. Now, the hero Wesley repeatedly attempts to rescue Buttercup, and this exasperates Vizzini. And so over and over, you hear him utter the phrase, "Inconceivable!" And then finally, one of his henchmen says to him, "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means." Sometimes we use a word and then we find out that word doesn't mean what we thought it meant. Or maybe we've been using it in the wrong context. Take the word fear. When we think of fear, we often think of negative things. We think of a scary movie. We think of a walk in the dark. We think of, a global pandemic. Now, those are all bad, negative things, harmful things. And that's why it's so hard for us to ascribe the word fear to how we respond to a loving God. After all, if God is love and love casts out fear, then why should we fear God? Well, the truth is, there's been a little bit of a hijacking with that word. Satan has manipulated that word for his own purposes, and that is his MO. He wants to take anything that God has reserved for himself and try to use it to bring glory to himself. And the Bible is filled with comparisons between godly things and worldly things. There's godly love, there's worldly love. There's godly joy, there's worldly joy. There's godly sorrow, there's worldly sorrow. And yes, there's godly fear and worldly fear. And many of us would assume that of all the things to be feared, that God is not one of them. However, it is God alone who is to be feared. Psalm 76:4 says, "You are radiant with light." And it goes on to say, "You alone are to be feared." The only thing that we have to fear in the true biblical sense is God Himself. And we are duped by our enemy if we fear anything other than God. What does godly fear look like? It looks like obedience. Obedience to the one who is our final judge, who is more powerful than anything. He alone is to be feared. And when we obey Him, there are benefits to that real godly fear. We see in Proverbs 9, it produces wisdom. We see in Psalm 112, godly fear produces blessing. We see in Proverbs 16, it produces deliverance from evil. And Jeremiah 32 says that godly fear produces a real, lasting, intimate relationship with a holy and sovereign God. Godly fear is obedience to the Lord. And He wants you not to fear the world, but to fear Him. And when you fear Him, that makes you bold as a lion. So fear not, and fear God.